Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be talking about budget gaming, specifically the system over my shoulder here, which is featuring an i3 4150. That's a Haswell generation, 4th generation Intel processor, and that is 2 cores and 4 threads. Now let me start by suggesting first and foremost, if you are building a gaming machine in 2018, whether it be an old pre-built like this one, or whether you're building a brand new gaming rig, I would highly recommend going for, if at all possible, if you can fit it in your budget, going for a quad core over a dual core any day, even if it means going to a slightly older generation. So for example, I'd rather see you getting a Sandy Bridge or an Ivy Bridge i5 than a Haswell i3. And the reason for that is just that those 4 cores are going to give you stronger gaming performance, at least in most games, except maybe some games that really only use 1 core. You might be able to get a little bit more out of the i3 than maybe something like a 2000 series i5. But for the most part, for most modern games, you're going to be getting a little bit better performance out of older generation i5s. And if your choice is between a newer i3 or an older i5, I think the i5 for most people is going to be the better overall choice. And that's of course if we're not talking about the Coffee Lake processors, because if you're buying a Coffee Lake i3, you are getting a true quad core. Of course, then with an i5 Coffee Lake chip, you're getting a 6-core processor. So to cut straight to the catch, this system, like I said, features that i3 4150 with 8 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM running at 1600 megahertz. And for these tests, I was actually running the games off of the SSD that I just have on my test bench. I just pulled it out and put it into the Dell system, though Witcher 3 was run off of my NAS over the network. And most of you already are aware of this, but the storage medium that you're running your games off of, outside of the initial load and sometimes some frame stutter that's associated with loading into the game once you first get in there, for the most part, the storage medium has almost no bearing on the actual outcome of the testing. So the frame rates, once everything is loaded in, doesn't really get changed much at all, if any, by the storage medium here. So using the SSD is still going to be pretty indicative of if you're using just a traditional hard drive. And for the GPU, we're actually featuring a GTX 1050 Ti, and the reason for that is really simple. I believe that this testing should reflect what I think is a pretty good pairing. This i3 with a 1050 Ti actually makes quite a bit of sense to me because they're both pretty budget parts. In fact, the system as it sits costs right around $250. And if you wanted to add an actual SSD to the system, because I'm just accounting for the hard drive that was included with the system when I purchased it, but if you threw in an SSD right now with SSD pricing, you could put the whole system together for about $300, give or take, depending on the capacity of the SSD you're adding. So the 3 games I tested were meant to reflect different levels of gaming. So I started with Overwatch to sort of represent esports games in general, as it's a fairly easy esports game to run. And just like I expected, it ran absolutely great. Now, when I first loaded into a match, there was just a little bit of stuttering here and there, but that smoothed out quite quickly. And at 1080p settings on the high preset, I saw really good frame rates, so absolutely a pass on that front. Next, I moved over to Kingdom Come Deliverance, which is a somewhat recent title, and it performed actually fairly well. I was getting my frame rates up into the 40s for the most part, and like I said earlier, with just loading into the game, I did see a little bit of stuttering, though for the most part, my frame rates were either in the high 30s or low 40s, and you'll notice as you sort of watch the gameplay, the GPU and the CPU are working at a similar level. So you're not really seeing a capped out GPU with the CPU only running at 20 or 30%. You're actually seeing the GPU and the CPU running at or near 100%, which tells me that the pairing is somewhat level. Neither one of those 2 components is really heavily bottlenecking the other. So we're getting about as much performance out of each of those components as we can without really pushing a bottleneck onto the other side of things. And last up, we have The Witcher 3, which I was very impressed with at the 1080p low graphical preset, where I saw frames anywhere from the upper 60s to the low 80s, which gives us plenty of wiggle room then to up the graphics if we want a little bit more eye candy. If you want to sort of flirt more with the 60 FPS range, you could definitely up this to the medium preset. or if you're somebody that does not mind lower frames in exchange for more eye candy, you could probably even hit the high preset and still be well over the 30 FPS mark. So just like the other games, The Witcher 3 actually gets a passing grade here with the 4150 paired with a GTX 1050 Ti. So I guess it is conclusion time. In 2018, if you get stuck with an i3 processor, whether it be a Sandy Bridge, Ivy Bridge, hopefully it's Haswell or newer maybe, but if you do get stuck with an i3 system, whether it be because you already just have the system and you just want to add a GPU to the system, or whether it be because you just happen to find a really great deal on the system, you can make that work in a gaming rig in 2018. Just make sure to be pairing it with an appropriate GPU. The GTX 1050 Ti for a Haswell architecture i3 actually worked out really well. Seemed like it was a pretty equal pairing, though you may want to even upgrade and you may see some benefit from like a 1063 gigabyte card depending on the game, or you could definitely pair an i3 with a 1050 and still be getting pretty much all of your performance out of the 1050 that you would possibly get. So if you're looking for a budget system and you find a good deal on an i3, while I am still recommending the i5s, especially if we're talking like a 3470 versus an i3 4150, you can definitely still get by on an i3. And if you find one with the right price attached to it, then don't hesitate, go ahead and pick it up, because you can in fact still get by with it. But I always like to kick it back to you guys. If you're on older hardware, especially if you're on like i3s, let us know how that's working out for you. Let us know your resolutions of the games you're playing and what kind of frames you're seeing with those, especially those older i3s, but even really those older i5s. Let us know down below. And of course, if you like the video, give it a like, share, subscribe, comment. You can follow me on Instagram and on Twitter at Hoosier Hardware. And as always, I'll let YouTube queue up a couple more videos around me from my channel for you to watch. I'm Shane with Hoosier Hardware, and I'll see you guys in the next video.